Good morning. You're watching a home broadcast of Business World Live. I'm Danny Laurel. It's 10:30 a.m. This Wednesday, we're about an hour into our shortened trading day. Let's kick off with our banner story. Another day, another gloomy forecast for the Philippine economy, but this time it's the economic managers themselves who see domestic GDP to dive further into negative territory. The Development Budget Coordination Committee, or the DBCC, revised their outlook for 2020 GDP to fall to between 2% to 3.4%. This is a deeper contraction than the previous estimate of a 1% drop earlier made by Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez. The DBCC expects GDP to rebound to up to 7.5% to 8.5% in 2021. But the DBCC says the coronavirus pandemic may cost the Philippines around 2 trillion pesos. And while the COVID-19 crisis persists, Moody's is also expecting the domestic economy to contract by as much as 2% in 2020. Besides this pandemic, the credit rater also pointed out weakening global outlook, falling oil prices, and turmoil in the financial markets for their forecast. Last month, Moody's gave a forecast of a 2.5% growth for the Philippines. This is now the second negative outlook for the country in just 1 week. Recall that Fitch had earlier said Philippine GDP could also contract by 2% this year. Moody's senior vice president at the Sovereign Risk Group said the forecast was revised downward. That's mainly due to the severity of the impact of these lockdowns. Malacanang had announced that Metro Manila, Cebu City, and the province of Laguna will be under enhanced community quarantine extended until May 31st. But this time it will be, quote, modified, which means limited movement of people to get essential services and to go to work will be permitted. This also means that the economy will be opened up gradually, with select manufacturing and processing plants allowed to operate up to a maximum of 50% of their workforce. Transportation will also be limited under the MECQ, and it will only be for the delivery of services and goods. The government had placed Luzon, which accounts for more than 2/3 of our GDP, under an ECQ in mid-March. Kind of scared to open my terminal this morning, but I had been seeing it since it opened at 9:30. You're going to be seeing on your screens here how we're extending those losses from yesterday, sliding by 0.3% to 5637.51. This as markets digest that new GDP guidance from our government themselves, or economic managers themselves. This, of course, follows us having slid already 0.3% on Tuesday. And this from Phil Stocks. The sellers had led the market yesterday after the government had announced that there would be another extension to the ECQ, now an MECQ here, at least in the capital. Foreign investors continued with the net selling. For the fifth straight day, we had outflows yesterday of just over 970 million pesos. Now, one thing to be watching out for here, apart from the fact that everyone has to digest all of this economic news right now, you've got even more rebalancing happening, and that's from the MSCI Philippine Index that will be taking effect on the close of May 29. So basically, for the big index stocks, Pure Gold has now replaced Security Bank. This was in a statement yesterday, and you can actually see Pure Gold up at least a touch by 0.4%. But take a look at Security Bank here, plummeting by more than 6%. Meanwhile, you've also got All Home and DMCI added to the MSCI Philippine Small Cap Index. They replaced East West Bank, Macro Asia, and Mega Wide. You can see Home here, which is, of course, All Home, up by more than 3%, together with DMCI at least bucking the rest of the sell-off. Now, one thing to be watching out for here are the banks. You'll be seeing on your screens here the loan growth for the month of March. That seems to be a bit of a bright spot, at least if you compare it to the month of February. We saw March loan growth accelerating by 12.3% year on year. This is according to the BSP. That compares to a rate of 9.4% in February. This on the back of household consumption up by 22.9%. So the BSP had said production loans actually made up 87.6% of the total. This was still the main driver of the growth. But again, if you take a look at household consumption, that actually eased. So it's still growing double digits above 20%. But compared to February, we had household consumption loans up by close to 40%. And they say that this was due to a slower expansion in credit cards and also motor vehicle loans during the period of March. Now, Union Bank's Carlos Asuncion saying that this print, or at least the acceleration of the loan growth, is also partly due to the easing of monetary policy from the central bank. Recall that Benjamin Diokno of the BSP did mention that there is a lag of around 3 to 9 months until the consumption is actually felt here. But you've also got Mike Rick, a fourth of RCBC, warning that in the coming months, the lockdown measures may see a dent in terms of these loan growth. Now, speaking of loans and banks, I'm going to just be taking out for you here PNB, and you can actually see that on your screens here. The earnings for the first quarter down 32% year on year. That's on the back of revenues actually up double digits, 33% to 12.4 billion pesos. And also, interestingly, net interest income up 25%, non-interest income on the back of trading gains up 58%. However, they had to significantly increase their provision for their loan losses. That's now at 3.4 billion, which is a coverage for possible NPLs in the first quarter versus what they had of just over 350 million pesos the year before. And this had brought down their net income significantly by close to 30%, or just around 30%. And, this, of course, on the back of their CEO, Vic Veloso, saying that it was actually a good quarter for PNB if you take into account the fact that, these provisions for impairment had significantly dented what should have been what they call a stellar performance. Meanwhile, you've got PNB here, just quickly showing you the terminal again. PNB actually sliding together with the rest of the local bourse, down 0.9% to 22 pesos and 5 centavos. Now, more on banks. It seems to be the focus of the morning. You've got Fitch weighing in and seeing a weaker operating environment for the Philippine banks. Take a look at what they have now revised in terms of outlook for our biggest lenders. BDO and Metro Bank were affirmed, at least for in terms of their rating. For BBB, negative stable outlook. But you've also got some which were downgraded. So PNB, for instance, was downgraded to double B. And you've got China Bank, DBP, and Land Bank, not necessarily in terms of the ratings downgraded, but actually on their outlook. So if you look across the board, the outlook seems to be now between negative to stable. We don't really see a positive outlook, at least according to Fitch. And just pulling out for you our PThink index here and seeing how that is performing, and whether you've got some standouts here after these Fitch re-ratings, so to speak. You're going to be seeing on your terminals here just our CBC in the green, up 0.6%. But as I mentioned, Security Bank leading those losses. But you've also got the rest of our lenders still in the red. Meanwhile, Fitch telling it like it is all around. Apart from the banks, they're also weighing in on our telcos. We're just going to be pulling out for you here how the performance of our two incumbent players here, Globe and PLDT, are actually doing this morning. PLDT bucking that sell-off, up by 1.2%. Recall that these are two stocks out of three, including Pure Gold, that are still in the green for the rest, for the year to date so far. But what is Fitch saying? He's saying that the revenues for the telcos will be relatively flat this year, and that is from a 7% increase, which we saw in 2019. And they are, of course, downgrading what they had previously estimated of a mid to high single-digit growth for these telcos. What they're saying is they might see a stretch in terms of leverage because of the fact that the cash flows, or the operational cash flows, might lag behind the investment outlays. Now, note that, PLDT and Globe have already provided guidance here for their investors. Globe saying that they have a more pessimistic outlook going forward for the second half, especially as people have less money to spend on data. PLDT, meanwhile, had cut its capex spending by 24%. And Fitch is saying that because of this spillover in deferred capex into 2021, they might actually be raising the leverage further, especially if the earnings don't come in, or the cash doesn't really come in. So Fitch still giving this pessimistic outlook, but as it happens, Globe bucking the sell-off, PLDT bucking the sell-off. Globe still unchanged this morning. Checking in on headlines this hump day, as more people are forced to stay at home and think of ways to generate income amid the quarantine, the Securities and Exchange Commission is cautioning the public against groups which are offering easy money investment schemes without a government permit. In particular, the SEC issued advisories against the Bayanihan program of Billy for Andrada, My Gold Rev, Friendship Philippines, and the World of CAPTCHA. The regulator says all four are not registered with the commission and do not have a secondary license required to solicit investments. Investment groups that are operating with no clearance from the SEC may be punished with a fine of up to 5 million pesos and imprisonment of up to 21 years or both. The Bayanihan Act also sanctions those participating in cyber incidents that take advantage of the current health crisis to prey on the public. These include scams, phishing, fraudulent emails, or other similar acts. The SEC cautions the public against investing in dubious securities that offer outrageous returns in a short time. Likes of My Gold Rev, for example, offers passive income through investment packages worth $20,000 to $100,000. That's in exchange for total returns ranging from 200 to 400%. Some offer cheaper investment plans, such as the World of CAPTCHA, wherein investors may participate by buying plans priced from 200 to 1,000 pesos and earn through CAPTCHA typing and referral bonuses. But the Finance Department is proposing to give the City of Bill more, quote, flexibility in granting incentives to attract investors to relocate their businesses into the country. Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez says the country's menu of incentives should not have a one-size-fits-all approach, noting that some investments may need unique incentives to serve the public's interests. Now, under the DOF proposal for Sitira, President Duterte will be given powers upon FIRB approval to provide a mix of incentives that are, quote, tailor-fit to the needs of specific investors whose relocation can yield significant economic returns to the country. Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez explains that this move will create more jobs and spur economic growth amid the pandemic. Legislators are currently looking to revise the Sitira, which is currently pending second reading approval in the upper house. Secretary Dominguez also notes that currently the structure of the country's incentive scheme offers limited room for negotiations compared to our neighboring countries. And while the Senate is busy tackling the COVID-19 response version of Sitira, lawmakers over at the lower house are proposing a 1.5 trillion peso stimulus program that is focused on infrastructure to counter the job losses caused by the COVID-19 crisis. This measure is filed as House Bill 6709, which is also known as the Cures Act, or the Proposed COVID-19 Unemployment Reduction Economic Stimulus Act of 2020. Now, under the measure, an automatic releasing Cures Fund is proposed to bankroll infrastructure projects in the HEAL category, which includes the construction of barangay health centers, municipal and city hospitals, and telehealth or e-prescription services, among others. HEAL projects will be evaluated to prioritize local employment during or after construction work, as well as the potential for forward and backward linkages with local businesses, suppliers and traders, MSMEs, and skilled and unskilled workers. This program is seen to run for 3 years until 2022, with 500 billion pesos for release each year, after which the Congress may vote to eliminate or extend that program. Real estate has traditionally been seen as a defensive asset during times of crisis, but now with the COVID-19 pandemic, keeping people at home, immobile, working from their homes, you've got construction projects also halted immediately. What is the outlook on a sector that relies so much on spaces? Well, here to chime in, we have with us David Lichui, CEO and President of Two Property Consultants. Good morning, David, and welcome to the broadcast.
Good morning, Danny. Thanks for having me over.
David, I mean, we just reported this dismal GDP outlook now from our own, government officials here. It's expected that the property space will take a beating together with all the other sectors. So that's not a surprise here. But what you are saying, at least in terms of your recent report, is that it will not only be resilient, we might actually still be posting growth, at least in 2020. So even in the short term, even amid this pandemic, tell us, with all of these closures, with businesses at a halt, construction projects, where are you going to squeeze out this growth?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of bad news out there, and there are a few companies right now that are feeling the crunch, or they're contracting in space. Although they're not a lot of companies, but we're starting to see a few, and very domestic companies that are dependent on local consumption. Okay, but setting that aside, and it's easy to come up with all the bad news that there is. You'll never run out of it. But what we're saying is that learning from 2008 and 2009, the BPO sector is going to push growth into the office sector. Even as we have gone through 6 weeks of lockdown, we are still doing transactions in the office sector. So in
We can
April,
actually show
in the beginning
that
of April,
chart of yours on your live transactions from the first quarter. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Instead of in April too, we said that in all likelihood the second quarter will be zero, right? And the
Okay.
reality is that in April we saw something like close to 14, 15,000 square meters of transactions in traditional space. Uh, Another 5,000 square meters in co-working space. But in that same period, another 50,000 square meters created in new demand for for clients that want to take space because of this new normal policy, where they need to take twice as much space because of social distancing. You know, so
Okay.
so we think the market will close somewhere between 800,000 to a million square meters. Even 6 weeks into this lockdown, we still think that way. And as recent as last night, we continue to validate these numbers. And so we're quite optimistic that it will lead somewhere at 800,000 square meters to a million. And that's going to be driven by the BPO sector. And as soon as the travel bans are lifted, the POGOs will make a strong comeback, and they will be in a much bigger footprint, because the irony of these lockdowns in China is that it just produced more demand for online gaming,
Okay.
and
Interesting.
nobody was there to service it because they were all locked down. The Filipino operation, which was 4 or 5 weeks late in the lockdown, after we locked down 4 or 5 weeks after China. So we went from servicing unprecedented demand coming from China to like zero because of the lockdown. And the Pogo struggled to fulfill that need. And I'm thankful that the Pogo sector as well as the BPO sector are now allowed to work back in the office at 50% capacity. And I think that's good, because it's just going to keep the momentum going for the office market. We have not seen a total net contraction. In fact, the growth in the office sector continues to happen. If you total January to April, we have recorded 171,000 square meters of office space taken up,
Okay.
right? So it's good.
Let's dive deeper into Pogo, since you brought it up already. There's such a mixed treatment of Pogos, right? You've got the president actively wanting that back, but people in the Senate saying, and also Finance Secretary Dominguez saying, they're not necessarily contributing that much to taxes, compared to the tax evasion problems that have been seen. And all of these crackdowns, made developers actually wary of having them as tenants. So tell us, what has changed because of this pandemic? After we emerge from this, are we actually going to be more friendly to POGOs? Will we be taking on that risk, given that there's still the regulatory issues on the table ahead of all of these health crisis issues?
Yeah, I think we made a very controversial statement a few weeks back when we said that Pogo is our friend. It certainly is the reason why the investment sentiment in the Philippines has been so positive in the last 4 years, because the pivot to China opened up the door for Chinese investors, and the first one to react to that opening was the Pogo sector. I mean, just imagine, Danny, China is the single largest investor in the world, and they have ignored the Philippines for 60 years. It's only the last 3 years that they started to notice and invest in the Philippines. And the POGO sector is just one sector of many sectors that have invested here. So, if not for the POGO sector, rents would come by half. People will stop buying um, office space, they will stop buying residential space. The POGO sector occupies close to 1.8 million square meters of office space, but close to 2 million square meters of residential space. It has created tens of thousands of millionaires instantly in the residential sector. And not only that, but the impact to tourism, the impact to domestic consumption has been phenomenal. And
Okay.
yes, there's an issue, social issue, there's a tax issue, but really, let's face it, these are problems of enforcement. In the
Mm-hmm.
same way that I can tell you that there are hundreds of thousands of businesses, local businesses, that up to today do not pay the proper tax. Do we go
Okay.
and say we should wipe them all out, or do we enforce the law
Mhm.
better? There's a, you
Are
know,
the prices, the rise in prices in the property space, which have hit record highs, even their share prices, on the back of the POGO growth that we saw, in the years prior, does that mean it's not sustainable if the POGOs leave? Because there have been reports that, if they leave, it's not such a big impact. The space will be taken over by the BPOs and traditional businesses. So you're actually saying that no, we need them because not only is it the low hanging fruit, that's actually the gateway for more investments from China.
yeah. So totally agree with what you're saying, Danny. Thank you for mentioning that. We think that we need them to grow by at least one more year, because the supply
Okay.
of office space is so significant that there's just no way for us to absorb all that space without them. If you look at this slide, okay, 2019 and 2018 were record years for the Philippines. Well, actually, we've had 15 record years in the office sector, and each year growing much bigger than the other. Very few countries in the world can say that they have 1.7 million square meters of net demand in office space. The Philippines, Manila, is the fourth largest market in the world for office consumption. And that's because of the BPO sector and the POGO sector working hand in hand. Now, the first 4 years of the POGO sector, there's a lot of negative sentiment. Now, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of 2002, 2001. What was happening in 2001? When the BPO sector was about to emerge,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And remember, we're 7 years into the Asian financial crisis, and the BPO sector started to grow in scale. And you know what people were saying? Oh, I sent my kids to college 4 years in the best schools just to be a phone operator. No, they were saying, oh, my kids are going to miss holidays, they're going to work overnight, they're going to be all this. I mean, the negativity surrounding the BPO
BPOs.
sector is probably no different from how we're treating these people today. And
Okay.
just like the Pogo sector, we had scams also in the BPO space, and we had to weed those scammers out. And
And we
so,
actually have this graph here, David, that you can refer to. And you were saying in your presentation that you're expecting a repeat of the 2007 2009 boom during the U.S. mortgage crisis of BPOs coming here. Can you detail why that's going to happen again right now? I mean, where does this fundamentally come from?
so 2007 was the historical high for Philippines. Prior to 2007, we did so. This is the highest we've ever had historically. 2007. We never knew that it will keep growing 15 years after, right? So
Okay.
2007, the 2008, the global financial crisis hit, and the total financial meltdown happened. But look at how demand has behaved since 2007. From 2007 to 2009, it doubled to about
Mm-hmm.
400 plus thousand square meters, and it was sustained for quite a number of time, and quite a number of years. And in 2016, when we started doing the pivot, the demand was coupled with the POGO sector. So the BPO sector growing and the POGO sector growing translated to this massive hockey stick in demand. And
Okay.
look at the dash line. the dashed line in blue shows you the demand. If the POGO did not happen, it would be a significant drop in demand. Now, the red line shows you the amount of space vacant in each of those years historically. And the dashed line shows you what the supply would be had the POGO sector not happened. And you will see that as early as 2017, we would have had 1 million square meters of vacant space and another million in addition to 2017 numbers. And then, so by 2019, we would have a total of 3 million square meters of vacant office space. It would have been ridiculous, you know?
Okay. So
Uh, yeah.
and this happened because of that crisis. David, I just want to jump off on that point because you're saying that this will actually be the bright spot. But a counterpoint to that is, I talked to Rayon Tal of IBPAP, and he was saying right now they're operating at 50% workforce, and they're actually targeting for everyone to be able to work from home. And this goes with the rest of the new normal. Retail mall vacancies were rising even ahead of the pandemic because of e-commerce, and now everyone's going to buy e-commerce. Banks, brick and mortar might start closing because I don't need to go to the bank anymore. So you're saying, we talked about this offline ahead of the broadcast, that you're expecting basically a V-shaped recovery in properties. People are going to go to the malls. People are going to be spending again. There's cash sitting around. There's liquidity from the central bank. But really, won't the new normal take hold? Or is this just, as you mentioned earlier, a temporary displacement in terms of the ways people work and live during this lockdown period?
So first is that I am not denying the tens of millions of jobs that are currently being shed and lost all around the world. You've got 20 plus million in the US, their jobs are decimated. But we think that as soon as they open, which is happening this week, many of those jobs are going to be absorbed.
Okay.
And so what's happening to many companies? They're looking at their global operation and saying, okay, the demand has contracted, therefore the supply capacity has to contract also. Once we go through this contraction, what is left, a big chunk of that will be offshored. And they can only offshore that in a scalable, expedient, and very quick way in 4 cities. That's Bangalore, Manila, Cebu, and Clark, where they can offshore 10,000, 20,000 people very, very quickly to develop scale and savings within 1 fiscal year. So that is happening as we speak. Now, the big question is, how long is this new normal going to be? Now, there's a much bigger chance that we will find a virus vaccine sooner than later. Okay? The chances of it being found and discovered and being rolled out will be greater than the other scenario, which is zero. Okay? And only because there's so much brain power, resources, time, etc., being committed to this. Now, the new normal will be, we need more space because people are going insane working from home. I think,
Go ahead.
I don't know how many of your friends want to strangle their spouses or their sister or their brother or their dad or their mom because they're spending too much time together and they're going crazy, right? And that's an unspoken reality. Here's another reality, right? 70% of households in the Philippines do not have access to heat insulation. And many of those households have rationed water, if at all, right? So just imagine those circumstances where the heat is just cooking you in the house. You've got nowhere to go. You've got sketchy connectivity. You've got load that only can last you so much. You've got relatives all over the place in a very small place. You can't take a shower 3 times a day, like maybe most in the upper class.
Right.
So these are realities that, and then there's fraud. What many people don't realize is that corporate fraud, scams, corruption in the private sector is actually very high. Now, just imagine if you remove the supervision provided by physical space in office, you remove that you remove that environment. What do you think are these guys going to do?
Okay.
So all it takes is 1 or 2 major incidents of fraud to make that happen. Now, Uh, so many of my clients are saying, okay, temporarily, we will need 9 months to 12 months of temporary space. And that's
Okay.
why we're seeing this big spike in workspaces,
Mhm.
in flexible workspaces.
Okay, so the new normal will be happening, but it's possibly unsustainable in an environment like the Philippines, where we don't necessarily have the tools and the infrastructure to support work from home environments, and stick to the low hanging fruits, VPOs, POGOs that are already existing and investing in our country. Thank you so much for those insights, David.
You're welcome.
And that was a first look into the business day. Today is May 13, 2020. Catch us again 10:30 a.m. I'm Danny Laurel, and we are One News.